Hello, I'm Dan Robinson with FPTV, and I'm here today with Dr. Jason Arents, visiting professor at the UALR in economics and finance. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much. I'm psyched to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. So you have a very interesting set of skills.
Thank you. People say this from time to time. Yeah.
Tell us about them.
I kind of stumbled into them just by following my interests over time, but it is a funny basket of goods. My PhD is in economics, and so I teach economics, primarily also quantitative analysis, down at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock. I've also taught here in the supply chain management department, which is another batch of interesting skills, applied economics and inventory. I'm also in economics here at the U of A. And then I used to work over at J.B. Hunt in business intelligence analysis. But my PhD was in economics. My bachelor's degree was in physics. I'm interested in movement art, dance. I do aerial fabrics. I did Kung Fu for more than a decade, it's kind of a funny batch of skills, but all of it, to me, it all makes sense. To me, it all integrates together into this one, concept of a life well lived.
That's amazing. So when people hear economics, the first thing you think is, right? I mean, it's like economics, and it's like numbers and things, but the application of economics, the way that principles of economics bleed into the rest of our lives, is a perspective that you bring to the table that I find very interesting.
I'm so glad to hear that. And that's the aspect that I think when people discover the interest of economics, that's the way they think about it. The reason for that is economics is actually a science of choice. It's ultimately trying to ask the question, why do people make the decisions that they do? It's a little bit different from psychology in that psychologists tend to ask, why did this one crazy person do this thing? How can I heal this person? Which is awesome and is a really important discipline to have. But economists are usually more interested in what does the rational person do? What does maybe the average person do? Or why do we see patterns of behaviors like we do in the world? But if you ask the question, what part of your life involves some kind of human making some kind of choice? There's very little outside of that. So I think you could overstretch and say, I don't think economics necessarily answers all questions in life, but it touches upon almost everything we care about. And that's part of why I get so geeky about it, because I just love people.
So give us an example of something just a day-to-day thing that then all of a sudden is economics, even though we don't even realize it.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a lot. This is what I'm looking forward to talking with you about at length, is just trying to map out just the vast space of these kinds of things. So I just had a daughter, and I'm very overwhelmed, totally just falling in love with this little girl all the time. She's always on my mind. She's the first thing I think about, right? And it's an amazing experience, and babies are extremely expensive. But the expense of babies isn't really so much in the medicine you buy them or their clothing or anything like that. It's that there's this huge opportunity cost. You have to give up so many things in the rest of your world in order to make time for that baby, right? And so it's interesting because over time, as people, particularly as women, have had more additional options in the world, besides just being a lot of women describe themselves as feeling like they're in baby factories, which I think is just so sad, right? It's tragic. But around the world, in any culture where women start to have outside employment options, where they can say, maybe I don't want to just be a mother of 12, maybe I want to pursue some other career, right? Maybe start my own business. That opportunity cost plays out in their decisions. And in fact, what we've seen around the world is as countries become more developed, as women have more options, they have fewer children. And, case in point, my wife and I, both very busy being economists, right, a lot going on, it's very likely that we'll only have one child. I would like to have another child. This debate is underway. But it's not surprising to me, right? My wife in particular, it's a massive cost. She can't be doing a lot of other things when we're in this early stages in particular of having a baby. But one of the nice outcomes of that is you don't need to have some kind of crazy central global population control mechanism. The thing that slows down and eventually tables population growth, that leads to a stable total population, is just the fact that we've got other things to do.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. So projections, futurists who have really looked at this, population specialists who've really looked at this. A lot of populations, a lot of countries, their populations are actually in decline. They've already hit a peak. They're slowly on the decline. As people get wealthier, it seems to be pretty predictable. We just kind of flatten out. And then eventually a lot of couples don't even do a replacement rate. Instead of having two, they have one. So this concern that's been floating in the back of social science minds for 1,000 years more, that like at some point the whole planet's just gonna like fall out of orbit because there's so many people on it or something, right? It turns out it's not a problem.
Wow.
We're gonna hit this peak and it's just gonna stay there. And in fact, now a bunch of the sort of cottage industries are in saying, oh, but is that a problem? Do we need to find ways of getting people to have more babies? Because brilliant minds are what lead us to the kind of like wealthy lives we get to have. And so now the debate's on the other side. Some countries are trying to subsidize families, and it's wild.
Golly.
But all of that comes down to the economics of opportunity cost.
Right.
Why are you having a lot of kids? Well, absent having any mode of financial saving or security, like your kids are the thing that are going to protect you later on in life. Some econ professors like to point out the sort of social security aspects of even like biblical verses about taking care of your family, taking care of your parents. I mean, like honor your father and mother.
Right.
Like, well, how is that not a social security program, right? But if you have other ways of saving, other ways of investing, if you have, if it's more likely that your children are going to survive, right? So I mean, sometimes it's fun and goofy, but there's a sad side. And in case, just for us, our daughter had a first world birth. If she had been born even in like the 40s in America, it's very likely that she wouldn't have survived. We had some complications that required very modern monitoring, but also just very modern medicine to take care of.
Wow.
But as a result, she's happy and healthy, and it's amazing. And so as heartbreaking as that was as an experience to go through, like I'm also extremely grateful that it's now that it's happening.
Right.
But since my baby can survive, I don't need to worry about like having 15 of them to make sure that one or two of them make it past 5 and then can take care of me in old age.
There you go.
So babies, the thing you love the most, right? Like something you're really loving and emotional about. It's like the most important thing in your world. You're like, that's not economics. You don't buy babies. No, but you make choices regarding them.
There you go. So you and I had the pleasure of meeting at the Northwest Arkansas Creative Arts Network Creative Exchange Conference.
I'm glad you remembered all of that.
That
was
happened
a
this
long
year.
name.
It was a long name, but it was an amazing group of people getting together and talking about arts and talking about economics. And I'm curious to have you kind of talk to us a little bit about how economics impacts and how that rubs up against art, and especially when it comes to artists, because here at FBTV we talk to a lot of artists and we try to help artists any way we can. So tell us about the economics of art.
Absolutely. So this is one of my favorite topics, actually, and it was in part because of the invitation to come speak at the Creative Exchange that I really got thinking about this more carefully. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's always been in the back of my mind, but it was nice to focus on that. So there's really two major aspects here about creativity. So art, but I'm gonna broaden a little bit and say creativity. That creativity, with its impact in other aspects of economics and economic life, but also what economics has to say about creativity. And I see those two as parallel, as complements, and I'm really looking forward to developing both of those over time. And I hope we get to talk about it here. It might be a big enough topic to require a whole spinoff. I don't know. Like it's huge. So here's the two big issues. First of all, every innovation we have in life is ultimately a creative endeavor. And there's sort of two aspects. There has to be the creative person, and that might be an inventor, or that might be an artist, or it might be some other designer, right? But then there's an additional stage of that, which is then some entrepreneur has to actually bring it to market so that people can experience it. Now, you might be able to go and devise some new form of watercolor or sculpture or something, or some other like creative expression, but if you never share it with anyone, it dies with you. Now, that's fine, like you have the right to bring your art to the grave if you wish, but I found that most creative people, there's an energy that comes from actually sharing that, from bringing that out into the world. So the two parts of that, it has to be created first, but then it has to be brought out and presented and paid for in some way, because there's always an opportunity cost for creation. The paint's had to come from somewhere. If you're painting, you're not also farming, so somebody has to get you food. So how that creative mind, how that creative product actually makes it out into the world, super fascinating. And then on the other side, well, what is it that you're doing when you create, right? What is it that you've accomplished when you paint something that is emotionally profound for someone to see? And why would they buy it from you? Right.
Where does it get its value?
Exactly. Where does it get its value? That's another core question in economics. Where does it get its value? And so this is another deep question. So the short version is humans are fundamentally creatures of meaning. We seek out stories, narratives. We want to feel purpose in life. We do things purposefully. We have a desire for something, but the desire fits into a broader story. Like, who am I? Why do I want to do this thing? What are my goals? So from that context, then sort of in an effort to meet those goals, but also just in an effort to live well, to make the most out of your life, you seek out choices that help you improve those values, to maximize your values, to create new values in the world. And one of those values might just be, I want to pursue goodness. I want to pursue something heroic. You see that work of art and you say, this inspires me. This thing matters to me because it is a symbol to me of what it means to be a good person, or what it means to be grand, or an inspiration, a reminder to me that it's worth the struggle, that it's worth the ethics, it's worth the hard choices to go out and be a good person. So that is a value that I experience. But it's interesting because the value doesn't exist inside the painting, right? The artist doesn't add some paint and add some fabric and then sprinkle in some value, right? Nor is it something that you can weigh on a scale. You can weigh its mass, you can measure the wavelengths of the photons bouncing off of the painting, but the value is evaluated in the mind of the person experiencing it. And that's a confusing thing for a lot of people, even Aristotle. I mean, people got this wrong for thousands of years. I'm delighted that the science of economics has come a very long way so that we can understand much more clearly now what's really going on there. So the person observing the painting says, wow, that's amazing. I really value this. Hey, I'll give you $1.05 for it. And the painter says, look, I think maybe you value it more than that, but more importantly, I can't pay my bills. I can't do this. I can't even cover the cost of the paint at $1.05, right? And we can argue back and forth. Well, but you already painted it, so what else are you going to do? But then the painter says, but I might want to paint one in the future as well. This is a career move for me. So a negotiation occurs between the person who wants to have possession, who wants to take property right ownership of the painting so that they hang it in their own house or gallery or whatever, and the painter who's has to give up their baby in a sense, right? Who has to part with something they really care about. And there were a lot of costs associated with making that. Most importantly, they weren't doing something else. They weren't growing food. They weren't working some other job. How are you going to compensate that opportunity cost? A lot of things come back to opportunity costs. And so that negotiation takes place between the two of them, but it actually takes place amongst thousands and thousands of people, right? There's a lot of different buyers who might be interested and they bid up the price, but there's a lot of sort of similar artworks that are, in a sense, also competing for buyers. And the price, whether that transaction takes place is ultimately determined by all of those dynamics simultaneously. So even if you think, well, I'm in it to create this beautiful thing, I'm not in it for the money, that's fine, right? That's a fine attitude to have. But I would actually sort of discourage that a little bit in the following sense. You're creating value, but you want other people to appreciate values, maybe not that specific one, but you want to create value for other people as well, because there's things that they create that you value as well. And the seduction, the thing that allows for that transaction to take place, is when I have created something of value that you want. Not something of value in the abstract sense. I've created something that you value so that I can get other values from you. You'll build a house from me because I've created something that you value. Now, this gets into tricky territory, and this is, I think, why it's important to talk to artists about it. It's easy to think, well, I don't want to be a sellout, right? But I would say if you are creating something that speaks to something universal in humanity, and you're true to that, and you're honest to that, that's what people are going to tend to value the most anyway, right? But the fundamental thing is, if you wish to live in a generally free society, and you wish to get values from other people without having to beat them up and steal them from them, right? Which I hope everyone feels that way. If you want to live in that peaceful society, it is incumbent upon you to offer to them values, things that they value, in exchange for whatever it is that you want in return. So that's at the fundamental of it. So the creative is necessary for the growing world. And I want to be one little pitch here. One thing that drives me crazy amongst some economists is to talk about the economy as if it was this anthropomorphic personification, as if we had deified in some animistic way, bow down to the great GDP, something like that. No, it's people. When we talk about the economy, that's unfortunate and misleading shorthand for saying, what do people value? What are people doing? And that's one of the things I always try to bring my classes back to as well. So it's not about trying to contribute to the economy, but rather about how do I create something of value so that I value it, so that other people value it? How do I exchange that with other people? How do I make it so that the most people possible get to experience that value, and then because of that, they also give me values in exchange? That dynamic, that interaction, is probably 2/3 of the question of how wealth grows and why it is that we're able to sit here under false lights that are beaming photons on us so that they can travel down electrical wires and complicated optics and whatnot and get into the living rooms of people watching this show, right? That is a miracle. That is miraculous. It is amazing. And the less you take it for granted, the happier you'll be, because it is wondrous. The default is poverty. Wealth is the mystery.
Right. So understanding economics gives someone an understanding of society and of
Absolutely.
how we interact as humans.
Absolutely.
So it has definitely more value than just numbers and
Absolutely.
things like that. So
And you're a member of society, so it also gives you deeper insights into your own behavior and why you make the choices you do. So I actually consider it a very introspective thing as well.
wow. So we're very excited to be developing a series with you called Edgy Economics, where people will have the opportunity to hear more things like this on a longer format and learn more about how economics interacts with our daily lives.
I'm loving it. I'm really looking forward to it. And I got to say in part because there are things I'm always a little bit skittish talking about in classrooms, particularly in the modern campus censorship context,
Sure.
right? It's a really uncomfortable environment sometimes, but to be able to have a place where we can kind of let our hair down, as it were, and kind of geek out about sort of the edgier parts of economics and relationships, economics and sex, economics and marriage. There's some really fun topics that I'm looking forward to having a space to explore.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you so
here.
much.
And you can tune in to FPTV in the future to check out Edgy Economics. We appreciate you watching today. Thank you very much for joining us.